But let's go ahead and just recite, if you do have the prayer book in front of you, the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, and we'll just do this one time. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And then we'll go forward to do the mandala offering and the refuge and bodhicitta as usual. So again, if you do have a prayer book in front of you, generally these are on either page 87 and 88 or 80 or 97 and 98. The older version of the prayer book is the earlier one, 87, 88. The newer version is around 97 to 98. So again, we'll just do the short mandala offering prayer and then go on to refuge and bodhicitta, once in English, twice in the Tibetan. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi drola penshir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sonam Gi Drola Penshir Sangye Drupar Sho. Okay, then let's go ahead and do a short meditation as we usually do. Allow ourselves to focus the mind a bit, first by doing a few minutes of meditation on the breath. And then after that, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation for this evening's session. So I'll ring the bell just to begin the session, and then you can meditate in silence for a while. So as we've already seen in this series of classes, we have at the root of all of our suffering this very first link that was discussed in the beginning of chapter 26, this link of ignorance. This ignorance is not just a not knowing, but an active misknowing. We are misunderstanding the nature of ourselves, the nature of reality. And on that basis, we go on to create actions. Those actions are imprinted on our consciousness and eventually give rise to a rebirth. And then we go about experiencing the varieties of suffering. We create the further causes to have this continuation of this cycle of existence. And this has been going on, the Buddha says, since beginningless time. So in this teaching on the 12 links, we're learning the process by which we are engaging in samsara. And as I said earlier, the root is ignorance. So when we come together in this class that's particularly directed at helping us to discover this middle way, this perfect view that is the center between the two extremes, allowing us to know reality as it is without in any way negating reality, without adhering to reality in a fictitious way, to have that perfect wisdom. So it's important that we generate the best motivation for doing this. And as is pointed out in the Lam Rim, we initially do have to understand our own situation very clearly. We do have to want liberation, freedom, nirvana for ourselves. We do have to have that level of renunciation that is turning away from these patterns that have got us caught up in samsara towards the path that will lead us out of that and into the state of nirvana. So we can begin with that level of motivation. Most assuredly wanting that wisdom for yourself so that you then can know the taste of freedom, the peace of nirvana. But then, as always in this Mahayana tradition, we bring into our awareness the reality that all sentient beings are exactly like ourselves, continuing to suffer in the exact same way due to the exact same causes, every one of us in that same predicament. And because every one of those beings has been our kind mother, father, brother, sister, friend, companion, has shown us incredible kindness in a variety of ways, it would be very selfish if we were to simply be focused on our own freedom from samsara and leave behind all these kind beings. So we generate a motivation that is together with compassionate and loving thoughts towards those beings, wanting them to know true freedom, wanting them to achieve their greatest potential and be free from all suffering. And we direct our minds towards the goal of our own Buddhahood, our own enlightenment, so we can then lead all sentient beings to attaining that same state. So set that motivation of bodhicitta very firmly in your heart for tonight's teaching so that it instills a powerful motivation into everything we do and thereby brings about incredible results for both ourselves and for all sentient beings. Okay. So again, welcome everyone to this third class, I believe it is, of this series on the uh, fundamental wisdom of Nagarjuna. So again, we're using a particular verses that His Holiness the Dalai Lama uses when he teaches on the same text. And so the main book that I'm kind of following in terms of some of the commentary that I'm trying to elaborate on is His Holiness's book called The Middle Way, Faith Grounded in Reason. But then I've also been using Lama Tsongkhapa's Ocean of Reasoning, which is the commentary that he did on this text. So before we go too far into what where we left off last time, I did want to talk about the kind of updated chart, revised edition of the first chart that we've been using the last few classes. So anyway, yeah, this is um, I think, yeah, it's on the first page there. I don't know if all of you have received it. There was a link where you could go and find that in Dropbox. But essentially that first page has a link, the link of consciousness, the third link. And when I went through this last time and putting this together, I was just kind of going through His Holiness's book and began with some of what His Holiness said. And I made an assumption about that second part of consciousness. Recall that you have the first two steps, the ignorance that is present in the mind, thereby giving rise to an action that is contaminated by that ignorance. That complete path of action gets imprinted on the consciousness. This is the third link. So in the third link, you have two parts to it. You have the cause consciousness, which begins when that imprint occurs, when that actually is embedded in the mind. But then you also have what's called the effect consciousness, which I'm going to read what I've put in the revised edition here. The first part is the same. His Holiness says, the potency nourished in this way by the eighth and ninth links yet to come and other factors is fully activated at the end of the previous lifetime. So that's where I left it last time, and then I talked about how I would say that that is equivalent then to the consciousness at the time of the 10th link, which is the link of becoming, which is when that karmic seed, that is the second link, has been fully activated by the eighth and ninth links, the craving and grasping. But then later in this section, His Holiness, well, he continued and right after that, but then I've got a bit of a break where I came in at the very end of it. So let me read that. He says, between any two lifetimes, there is an intermediate state, which can be as short as 1 moment or as long as 49 days. So then he jumps ahead and says, leaving the intermediate state, you enter the womb, that should say of your new mother, if you are taking womb birth, that is the first moment of the new lifetime. It is called the effect consciousness. The term refers to that 1 moment of consciousness, the beginning of the new life. So it's kind of interesting because in the next one, when name and form is introduced, it refers to that at the point of conception, which would be the moment of birth into the next existence. So it's a little still unclear to me as to when these all happen because consciousness, effect consciousness seems to give rise to name and form, but name and form seems to happen simultaneous with effect consciousness. It's not a big deal. I just thought I would correct that because it does seem that from most of the teachings that I've read that they're equating that moment of consciousness to the very first moment in the new existence. So up until that point, we could say there is cause consciousness, though cause consciousness is primarily that first moment when the seed of that karmic seed is imprinted on the mind, but it carries over all the way through that lifetime or many lifetimes, depending upon how many lifetimes there are intervening. We're going to look at this shortly this evening, but essentially kind of gives rise eventually to the resultant state. That projecting karma that we've been talking about eventually through being ripened will give force to a rebirth. And so that rebirth, the very first moment of it, seems to be what's being equated to as the effect consciousness. So then after that would be name and form or simultaneous with it. Again, it's a little unclear from the teachings I've read as to the timing of all of this. And then name and form is essentially the birth into the new realm when one has the physical component, which would be in the case of a womb birth, the fertilized egg, and then the consciousness component, which is the name part of that. One has the form and the name. And so those essentially begin at that point and continue on, the six sense spheres developing and so on. Everything else on that chart was identical. I just added that one little bit in terms of slightly clarifying that. So what we're going to do tonight then to continue is there's a second chart that I'll be going through first, and then we'll go back to the verses. Chart 2 is called the 12 Links of Dependent Origination, 2 Presentations, because we can talk about it in terms of how it is explicitly set out, which is how the Buddha taught it in the Rice Seedling Sutra, these 12 links, one after another. And then we can talk about it in terms of the number of lifetimes that it takes to complete a full cycle of the 12 links. And this kind of gives a deeper appreciation for the ways in which these sort of overlap each other so that you can have different links going on at the same time, in a sense, in terms of where you are in regard to a particular lifetime. But the very first part, the presentation in terms of the explicit order of the 12 links, kind of goes through these and individually, 1 through 12, and of course dividing the third one into the first part, the cause consciousness, and the effect consciousness being the second part that we just discussed. So essentially what I want to do before we get into this is define some of these terms, because you'll see on the chart that we have 4 columns. We have the projecting causes, then we have the projected results, then we have the actualizing causes, and then we have the actualized results. So essentially these 4 categories need a little bit of explanation in terms of, I did talk about them a little bit last time, which actually I think tonight's the 4th class. I think that was the 3rd class that I talked about that. But I want to go into that in a little bit more detail. And here too, I want to use some of the teachings from Steps on the Path to Enlightenment by Geshe Sopa. And essentially what we're doing in terms of these, just to give you a feeling for projecting versus actualizing, is that this is a way of presenting how, by virtue of us committing the initial action that are the first 2.5 links that are in that first column, you are sort of projecting a future life. You haven't yet come into that future life because it's still just a potency at that point. It doesn't have the ability or hasn't really completely been enabled to give forth a new existence. The projected results are the idea that once you have that within your consciousness, that action that you've committed together with ignorance, then it is projecting the potential for it to eventually arise in terms of being fully potent, and then giving rise to one's new existence in terms of name and form, that one will develop sense spheres, have contact with objects, and eventually have the feelings that arise from that. So it's kind of saying that, every time that we plant one of those seeds on our continuum, we are projecting a result of another rebirth that will have all these various factors that, of course, will lead us into creating similar causes to have it recur again, for us to continue the cycle of existence. So the actualizing causes and the actualized results are set separately from those, because they are talking about what actually makes that potency into a reality. So in regard to the projecting causes, which are once more through the ignorance, the action we've created, the karma that has been imprinted on the consciousness, through those last 3, which are the craving, grasping, and then becoming, these 3 actualizing causes that are in the 3rd column there, you are bringing that seed to its potency. You are bringing it to the ability for it to create another rebirth. And then finally, you have the actualized results, which are no longer projected at this point. They are coming into existence because that 10th link, the link of becoming, is that fully actualized karma. It now will most definitely bring forth its next rebirth. Now, when it is set out this way, you'll notice a footnote on there. First of all, for projecting causes, there's a footnote under lifetime A there. Lifetime A is a past life which precedes lifetime B, which is the present life. And this is the way it's presented in this explicit order, is that we can sort of see that we are currently together with a body and consciousness. We have the sense spheres active. We are coming into contact with objects and experiencing various feelings. So there can be any number of lifetimes between these two, between A and B, in terms of this explicit order, which is the literal order of these. And that's, again, going to be a little bit different than how I just explained them, because that comes into play in the second presentation. But in a literal presentation, we can say there was initially some moment of ignorance in a past life, be it many lifetimes ago, be it our last life, that gave rise to an action. That action was imprinted on the consciousness, and then coming into this life, there was the development of the name and form, 6 sense spheres, and so on. Then when we get to the end of this life, at the end of lifetime B, which is our present life, because of our habituation towards craving and grasping and so on, that nurtures another seed. So in this case, as you see on number 10 there in that very first set of the presentations, there's a footnote number 2, and it says in this more linear presentation, the 10th link becoming is the actualizing of a karma from another round of the 12 links. So you can't possibly have one karma giving rise to 2 rebirths. In this case, you had the karma from lifetime A already giving rise to the lifetime we have currently, which is our present life, lifetime B. At the end of lifetime B, we will be nurturing another seed that would have come from either earlier this life or another life, and that will propel us into the actualized results, which are lifetime C. Lifetime C being the next life, and there will never be any interval between B and C in that case, because once we have the actualizing causes in place, they will bring that karma to its full actualization, and it will most definitely propel us into our next existence. So when you talk about them linearly, it's to kind of give us this, or more explicitly, give us this presentation of how we're within a particular set of the 12 links that is involved in creating the causes for our future existence, having been propelled into this existence from a prior karma. So it's a very, I don't know, it's a kind of a strange way to look at it in that regard, but I felt like I needed to do that. It was part of the teachings that are set out by a Sangha when he went through and explained this. Um, the next two that are both presentations in terms of the number of lifetimes is where we understand this in a little bit different way. When we think about an entire set of the 12 links only involving one karma, and that one karma being the karma that is imprinted on the mind in the very first few steps of this, first few links. And this is how I've been talking about it, because this is the more important presentation in some regard, because it gives us a feeling for, once more, how a particular set of 12 links begins whenever we have an action that is impelled by ignorance imprinted on our minds. Once we have that action in our minds, it's got the potency, it's a potential for projecting a new existence. Until it arises, or until the other factors arise, though, the actualizing causes, it won't actually bring forth its result, which would be the next lifetime or another lifetime. So let's look at those two in terms of the number of lifetimes, and then I'm going to talk a little bit from Geshe Sopa's book, as he'll go into a little more detail of why it's presented in this way. But the projecting causes here are, again, in lifetime A in regard to 2 lifetimes. We could consider that to be this current lifetime. So through the force of this ignorance that we have in our minds right now, we have done this many times. We have engaged in a karma that is a complete path of action. We have imprinted it on our consciousness. It is continuing to reside in our consciousness and is projecting the result that in this case will be our very next life. So those projected results that are in column 2 that are together with lifetime B are the effect consciousness, which will mean, again, when that at the beginning of that next life, when it has been fully potentialized, we will then be experiencing the result of that karma. It will produce the name and form, which are the initial moments of that next rebirth, when we have the body, in the case of a womb birth, the fertilized egg together with consciousness, name and form. And then we have the 6 sense spheres arising over time, come into contact with objects, experience the various feeling tones that are registered on the basis of contact with those objects. So those are all being projected by an action we're doing in this lifetime, in lifetime A. At the end of this lifetime, lifetime A, we have the actualizing causes, the third column, which means that when you get to the end of this life, if you haven't, gained some control over these factors of craving and grasping and so on through having eliminated ignorance, or at least having greater control over um, the level of craving and grasping that occurs, they will nurture that seed that was imprinted on the consciousness in the first column, in the projecting causes. Earlier in this life, again, you engaged in that action and it was imprinted on the mind. At the end of this life, because of your craving and grasping, it becomes fully potentialized. It becomes activated. And that is the 10th link, the link of becoming or existence. That same karma that was in link 2 is now fully actualized in link 10. So those are the actualizing causes that bring us to that point where we will be projected into our next rebirth. Then the actualized results will be that in lifetime B, which immediately follows lifetime A, we will then have birth, meaning the moment of conception. We will have aging and death, the aging that follows immediately after birth, after conception, as well as old age, and then eventually death, which will be the end of that existence. And then we would go on and be propelled into another existence on the basis of another set of the 12 links. So in both of these, 2A and 2B, I'll go through 2B shortly, we have a single full 12 links that are correlated with the action that we engaged in link 2. So that action from link 2, through the force of our craving and grasping at the end of this life, the 8th and 9th links, became the link of becoming, the 10th link, which is that fully potentialized karma that then propels us into lifetime B, our very next existence. So this can certainly happen, that in this lifetime we can engage in actions that are quite powerful and that will bring forth our very next rebirth. But there are other occasions when there are a number of lifetimes between that. Say in 3 lifetimes ago, we engaged in an action that was together with ignorance that was imprinted on our minds. That would have been the projecting causes of lifetime A, which in this case would be a lifetime, any number of lifetimes ago. It is projecting the results that will happen in lifetime C in that second column. This is where we're going to have 3 lifetimes involved. There can be no more than 3 lifetimes involved. There can be no less than 2. But in this case, lifetime C is a lifetime after the current one. Our current life in this presentation is lifetime B. Lifetime B is where at the end of this life, due to our craving and grasping, we activate a seed that was imprinted on our minds prior lives. It could be last life, or in this case, the example I was using was 3 lifetimes ago. That karmic seed that was imprinted on our consciousness came forward and is being nourished by craving and grasping, and becomes the 10th link of becoming, existence. That then propels us into lifetime C, which is our very next existence. Again, there's no break between B and C in this case. So this is the idea behind this, is that we have the potential to experience this on the basis of either 2 lifetimes or 3 lifetimes. But in this case, what we're presenting, what is before you on that chart, is a full 12 links that are propelled by the very first link of ignorance that gives rise to the action, that creates that imprint on the cause consciousness, and then it follows through on the basis of whether it'll happen at the end of the life that you created that action, that you get propelled into your next existence, or it happens some lifetimes later. And so this is, again, just a presentation that shows how complex this can become, because at any point in time, we are experiencing something that is within the set of another 12 links. Right now, we're experiencing the rebirth, the birth and aging and death that was propelled from another karmic seed. But we are imprinting karmic seeds on our consciousness all the time that will then give rise to future existences. So I want to read again just a little bit from Geshe Sopa, because I think he makes this really quite clear. This is pages 338 to 339 of Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, Volume 2. And he says, the reason that 2 sets of causality are shown is in order to point out the differences between the effects of projection and the effects of actualization in terms of their suffering natures. The projected effects actually remain in a state of dormancy or potentiality until such time as they meet the conditions to manifest in their actualized state. In other words, at the time they are projected, they do not come into existence in their fully actualized nature of suffering. They have that potential. They are suitable to become factors of suffering, but that will only happen when they meet the actualizing conditions. We can say that when they are projected, the projected factors are made suitable to manifest at some time in the future when they meet the necessary actualizing conditions. At that time, they will become factors of suffering. But at the time of projection, this has not yet occurred. So the way he's explaining this is that, the projecting part of it is saying that you are projecting the potential to have future suffering, the potential to have a future existence, but it hasn't yet come into existence yet. It needs the actualizing factors. So in this way, the initial projecting causes do speak to some level of causation involved in this, but the causation hasn't brought forth its full result yet, because that result doesn't occur unless the seed is actualized, which it happens on the basis of the actualizing causes. So then he says, for example, in some previous lifetime, perhaps a long time ago, I projected the virtuous karma to be born a human as Je Tsongkhapa, he says. We can say it was virtuous karma because I am now living a human life. At that past time, those karmic seeds were planted in this mental continuum, which were links 1, 2, and the causal aspect of link 3. What was planted by that action was the seed or potentiality of the projected effects, the factors of resultant consciousness, that second part of the third link, name and form, the 6 sense sources, contact and feeling. Then, at the time of death in my previous life, just before I was born in this life, the actualizing causes, which were links number 8 through 10, again, craving, grasping, and becoming, ripened this potentiality and brought about birth in this life, which are links 11 and 12, birth and aging and death. So he says, when we say that the seeds were planted, that the projected effects were projected, it means that they were rendered suitable to manifest when they meet the necessary actualizing factors. But as he said earlier, until they meet those necessary conditions, the projected effects remain dormant in a state of potentiality. This is the meaning of projected effects. Calling them effects does not mean that these factors are already manifest and fully functioning. It does not mean that contact and feeling have already occurred. He says rather, that these have yet to be actualized. So again, I could read more from this, but you might check out those pages if you have a copy of Geshe Sopa's book and read through that. But essentially, these two factors of being projected versus actualized are to point out a very important part of the process in regard to these 12 links, that we have two main sort of sets of causes that are involved. One that is happening at the time we commit the action, and the other that is happening at the time of death. And of course, this is why, as I pointed out last time, we have to have some consciousness around the time of death, some awareness, so that we make sure that we do what we can to at least be sure that we ripen more virtuous seeds, because the thoughts that we have at the time of death will help to give rise to particular karmas. And if we have more virtuous thoughts, then we have the potential to bring forth a virtuous action from the past. And we also, of course, have to be very meticulous in doing what we can to avoid the projecting causes, to try not to create complete paths of action that get imprinted on our minds that eventually give rise to future suffering. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in his book, On the Middle Way, he says, in brief, before a single cycle of dependent origination can be completed, even within a mere moment of time, ignorance initiates so many new karmic cycles by planting imprints upon our consciousness. Therefore, the amount of volitional karma, the second link, that we have accrued through ignorance and imprinted upon our consciousness is beyond calculation. From among this vast store of karmic imprints that are ready to bring about the link of becoming upon meeting the necessary conditions, one is activated at the approach of death by craving and grasping, the 8th and 9th links. In this way, when the link of becoming arises, the effects of the 3 propelling links or projecting links, ignorance, karma, and causal consciousness, are said to come to fruition. So he was just, I wanted to share that because he's just pointing out, that this is what we have been engaged in, even in this lifetime, engaging in actions that have created the potency for this whole process to continue, imprinted on our consciousness, that get carried forward from lifetime to lifetime until they eventually ripen into that projecting karma that takes us into our next existence. So this presentation, in terms of the number of lifetimes, gives us a better feeling for how this actually works. The presentation in terms of the explicit order that's on your chart there is a little bit different. And one thing I was going to do while I was doing this, I just realized this now, was actually share these in front of you. Let me go to the share and see if I can bring that up. So again, I don't know if all of you have that in front of you, but this is what I was just going through. Again, the presentation in terms of the explicit order that I just explained. So we have each of those various lifetimes. Again, this in a more linear way. So we could say this particular lifetime that we have, which is lifetime B in this case, came from the projecting causes. It's going to be at the end of this life that we actualize another karmic seed from a different set of the 12 links that gives forth to our next rebirth. Whereas The two that I just did, presentation in terms of the number of times, where it's 2 lifetimes versus 3. Here too, you have the projecting causes being the same in terms of those both coming from lifetime A. In this case, in the first case, lifetime A is this current life. And it's projecting a lifetime B that will immediately follow. At the end of this life, which is lifetime A, we'll be nurturing that seed and giving rise to our next existence. Then the one on the bottom there that has the 3 lifetimes is where we have the projecting causes coming from a previous life. Lifetime A was some time ago, either the previous life or their lifetime prior to that. And then it's projecting future lifetime C. Lifetime is our current life in this case. At the end of this life, we have craving and grasping from lifetime A, whenever that was. And that brings forth our next rebirth, lifetime C. So I hope that's okay. I apologize for not sharing those as I went through this. It might have been more useful to have the chart in front of you, but I'm not sure. Some of you may already have that. So those are, again, what I wanted to talk about in terms of this whole way of working with the 12 links, kind of understanding the 12 links, to know how they work in terms of this process of projecting versus actualizing, and how we have to be attentive to both of those sets of causes by not creating the negative karma as best as we can, so we at least avoid unfortunate rebirths, but eventually eliminating ignorance, which is at the root and the beginning of all those projecting causes. And then, of course, at the end of this life, by creating more virtuous thoughts that will help to propel us at least into good existences, but eventually to be free of that craving and grasping by being free of, once more, of ignorance, because that craving and grasping is always together with ignorance. So I don't know that last time I actually read through the commentary from Nagarjuna's Ocean of Reasoning on these last few, but I'm not sure it's so important. I might go ahead and go to that and just see if there's a few things I might want to share in regard to chapter 26. And then maybe after finishing this from last time, I'll see if there are any questions. So just one second. Let me make sure I'm on the right page here. So one second. I've got to do something here on the computer. So it says there, this is page 539 of Ocean of Reasoning. Having been activated by craving and appropriation, the birth of the aggregates of the later life arises from the existence, the becoming, in which potent karma gives rise to rebirth. So this was just speaking to how from that 10th link of existence or becoming, the next link of birth immediately arises. And this was commenting then on verse 9. It says there, from birth arises the aging, the ripening of the aggregates, and then death, the cessation of the aggregates. And then, of course, all the other things that were in this massive suffering that is being talked about here in regard to our experience in this life in verse 9. We have the misery, the heartache that comes with the deluded attachment to the one who is dying, and the lamentation caused by that misery, the suffering of assault to the 5 senses, the unhappiness, the assault to mind and agitation, the mental and physical agitation that arises from the unhappiness and suffering. All of this arises on the basis, and of course it's not set out as separate links, but included within that, from aging through death, are all the various things that we experience in samsara. Then on page 540, he continues in this last bit of commentary before we go on to the reverse process, which are what the last 3 verses are speaking to in regard to chapter 26. He says, just as we explained earlier, just through the power of its own causes and conditions, the whole mass, that is, the whole array or heap of suffering arises. Since it is essentially free from self and being mine, and we'll talk about this shortly because this is again where we're moving to in terms of chapter 18, the negation of this fictitious form of self that we are clinging to, that causes us to hold to things as being mine. All of this is merely imputed by fools, meaning it is merely fabricated by our ignorance, is suffering by its very nature, and is not even mixed with pleasure. In other words, any pleasure we have is only labeled as such. It's not really true pleasure. It is said that only a mass of suffering arises. Thus, this explains the order in which one engages with psychic existence. So this is the whole process then that Lama Tsongkhapa is concluding here in this section, these first 9 verses of chapter 26 that explain the entire process by which we engage in the suffering of existence. We continue to have those happening on the basis of those causes that we talked about. So then one final paragraph, he says, what would arise? Birth, aging, and death. Those are the 3 actualized results. Birth, aging, and death being lumped together in the 12th link, birth being the 11th link. What would give rise to them? The grasping that is conditioned by craving. Those would be the 8th and 9th links. How does that give rise to them? When the latent potentials that the dispositions have caused to pervade consciousness are raised to potency, they give rise to existence, which is the 10th link. And it says this shows that what comes into being is propelled by ignorance and the dispositions. Therefore, the cause that propels and comes to fruition refers both to the cause and effect of a single life, but does not refer to an individual life. So by saying this, a single life, he means, a single um, existence that in terms of the being who is together with that. But it doesn't refer to an individual life, meaning again that it may be overlapping between 2 lifetimes. However, the reasons that these 2 causes are presented separately is to distinguish between propelled suffering and the suffering to which it in turn gives rise, and to distinguish between the cause that propels and the cause that comes to fruition in the next life. So he's just talking about what we went through, and I won't try to, pick apart the sentences that he did that I just read, but the same process in terms of these 2 that are projected causes, projected results, actualized causes, actualized results. The Buddha was very kind of intent upon setting out this process in this way so that we would clearly understand the various factors that are involved in these 2 sets of causes, one that can be happening in this lifetime that will propel us to our next existence if it ripens at the end of this life, or one that could have happened in a prior lifetime that will be brought to the forefront at the end of this life and propel us into our next existence. So then he quotes from the Bhumi Vastu, which says, since everything from consciousness to feeling and birth, aging, and death have interrelated characteristics, why are they presented in 2 different ways? This is talking about the 2 sets of results, consciousness to feeling, birth, aging, and death, the projected results and the actualized results. The answer comes saying that is done in order to show the distinct characteristics of suffering phenomena and in order to distinguish between that which propels and that which comes to fruition. So because there are different causes for those, they're presented as different results. You have different in the projected results and the actualized results presented separately because you have different causes involved. Ignorance giving rise to an action, that being imprinted on the mind, is what projects your future suffering. Then what actualizes it is the craving and grasping at the end of a life and the nurturing of that seed so that it becomes fully potent to bring forth your next existence, which are the actualized results. So I think it's important to go through those. I hope it was clear in the way I explained them. But these 4 sets that are involved there, 4 factors that are involved there, 2 sets, the 2 that are projecting and projected, and the actualizing and actualized are set apart separately because the intention is to give us more knowledge to work with, to help us to understand everything that's involved in regard to those 2 sets of causes and the 2 types of results in a sense that they bring forth, even though those 2 results come together in terms of a particular lifetime. What we are projected into versus what is actualized will be the same sort of experience in a sense. So let me see if there are any questions in regard to this before I continue on. Otherwise, I'm afraid I may lose folks. So again, the page numbers, I did get a page number request for Geshe Sopa's text. The ones that I read were pages 338 and 339. And then someone wrote, I remember the 3rd link of consciousness is 2, causal and effect, and thus not simultaneous with name and form for the causal consciousness, right? Exactly. So what I was reading was just in terms of effect consciousness. Effect consciousness is, according to a number of the texts that I have, the first moment in the new existence. So it wouldn't be cause consciousness. Cause consciousness would be only, or at least beginning at that moment when the fully complete action is finished. Once that action has come to a conclusion, it is imprinted on the consciousness, and that is carried forward on the consciousness until result consciousness, until you have the result of that karma. Anyone else have any questions you could put in the chat box, or if you want to unmute your mic, you'd be welcome to do that and to ask a question. But if there aren't, then I'm going to carry on, and I hope that's okay with everyone. Let's go back to the text then. We're again in the text, the verses that you have, we're on page 8, the last page of this, because I put the 3 chapters in numerical order, 18, 24, and 26. We're starting with 26 because, once more, this is how His Holiness the Dalai Lama discusses this, these chapters from Fundamental Wisdom. From here, we'll go on to 18 and then conclude with chapter 24. So on page 8, we have verse 10, which is the beginning of this section where we look at moving from this whole explanation of how we get involved in the masses suffering, essentially recapping the first 2 noble truths, the truth of our dukkha, the situation we find ourselves in of being in a dissatisfactory suffering existence, and the causes of that, what gives rise to that. It's just a different presentation in terms of the 12 links. But essentially, this is the conclusion of that. Now we're moving into how do you reverse the whole process, which is essentially what the Buddha taught in the last 2 links. The link of the last two truths, sorry, the last 2 truths, which would be the truth of the cessation of suffering and the truth of the path that leads to that. So verse 10, you can certainly read it with me if you want, but since everyone's got their mic muted, it won't be on the recording, but it says here, the root of cyclic existence is action. Therefore, the wise do not act. The unwise one is an agent. The wise one, seeing suchness, is not. So this is essentially pointing to the fact that how we are going to be able to completely undo the whole process is by removing the ignorance that causes us to act. You know, the wise don't act because they are together with the wisdom, knowing suchness, knowing emptiness. Whereas the unwise ones, those together with ignorance, will continue to be an agent, will continue to give rise to actions that will be imprinted on the mind and thus give rise to future existences. Let me read what Lama Tsongkhapa says in Ocean of Reasoning. This is, again, the next part of this section of Lama Tsongkhapa's outlines. He's divided it into 2 parts. We had that whole first part that was going through the cause and effect of the 12 links that explain how we are caught up in dependent origination, this process of the 12 links. Now we're looking at the reverse order of dependent origination. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, the limbs of cyclic existence arise from such things as ignorance. Therefore, the primary root of cyclic existence, of such things as the entry of consciousness into the embryo, is action. Therefore, those who directly perceive the reality of dependent origination do not perform any action that would propel suffering. So the unwise who do not directly perceive reality are the agents of action. So we can say that action is the most direct cause of propelling you into the existence because it, again, in the 12 links, it's the second link, the action that we complete, that is a complete path of action capable of giving rise to a rebirth. It gets fully potentialized and ready to activate the next existence in the 10th link. So we could say it is the most direct cause of your experience of samsara. In the causal process, action, which is again karma, is what immediately gives rise to your experiences of suffering. But behind action are the delusions, and in particular in the 12 links is the delusion of ignorance, the fact that we are not together with the wisdom that understands the nature of reality. We are perceiving reality erroneously. Through the force of that ignorance, we act. We are an agent. We then engage in acts such as the acts of killing, stealing, lying, speaking divisively, and so on. All these various acts that we engage in volitionally, intentionally, imprint on our minds. They put the karma that gives rise to the result of another rebirth in samsara. So essentially, we can say action is the main factor that is giving rise to all of this, but action doesn't come about on its own. Action comes about because of our ignorance. Because here we are talking about contaminated action, contaminated karma, karma that is together with our misunderstanding of the nature of reality. So as long as that process that is in place of our ignorance giving rise to action, then we will continue to be agents propelling our own existences in samsara. Tsongkhapa goes on to quote sutra. He says from the sutra, this is from the Salistamba Sutra, O monks, this person who is completely bound up with ignorance performs meritorious actions. He also performs non-meritorious actions. He performs unshakable or unmovable actions as well. Remember how we talked about how the second link has three different types. You can have meritorious karma that will project you into a good rebirth within the desire realm. You can have non-meritorious karma, which projects you into the unfortunate states of the desire realm. And then you can have the unmoving karma that is from your deep meditative experiences and the four concentrations or the four formless absorptions that projects you into the form and formless realms. It's called unmoving once more because it causes rebirth at the exact same level at which you developed that particular concentration. So there are, for example, four levels of the form realm, the four concentration realms. You have four different concentrations that propel you into those respectively. The karma of the first concentration projects you into a rebirth in the form realm of the first concentration, and so on. So essentially, the sutra is just saying, that the person who's bound up with ignorance is going to continue to create these three types of actions that are only going to give rise to results within samsara, because whether it's desire realm, form realm, or formless realm, it's a product of samsara. It's a product of ignorance. So then he concludes saying, thus, the unwise are the agents. So only those who are bound up with ignorance are the agents of action. And the wise ones who have seen reality and who have abandoned ignorance are not agents because they see reality, because they see the truth of existence, because they see the wisdom of emptiness. They no longer will create karma that's together with any ignorance, because that ignorance may not be fully removed from their mind yet, but it's no longer an active force in terms of directing them into engaging in actions. So let me set this aside a little bit. I think there was a passage I also wanted to read from His Holiness. In terms of, this is pages 58 and 59 of the middle way, at least the version that I have, the hard copy version. I think I actually did read that. I already read that. Okay. So that's verse 10. Verse 10 is kind of showing that it is due to this ignorance, the very first link, that we are doing what we're doing and getting caught up in the 12 links. Without ignorance present, we wouldn't be an agent. We wouldn't be creating that action. So let's go on to verse 11. And verse 11 we can say is essentially talking about the process by which cessation is produced then. If we look at it from the point of view of the 12 links in reverse order, the idea is that we want to reverse the process. We want to be able to cease one so that all the others will eventually cease. So where does it start in terms of the cessation of it? Verse 11 says, when ignorance has ceased, actions will not arise. Ignorance ceases through insight into and meditation on suchness. So essentially, ignorance is the key link. And of course, we don't have the power of our wisdom realizing emptiness yet to completely do away with our ignorance, but at least we can begin to whittle away at it through our understanding of emptiness, which is where we're going once more in the next part of this course, to chapter 18, where we look at an investigation of the self. So this is, again, a way in which we can understand that the complete cessation of the process is only going to occur once we get rid of the link of ignorance. Once we have that root, which is the very first link, completely ceasing, then no more contaminated actions will give rise. No more things will come up in terms of contaminated actions, because we'll no longer be working from this fabricated view of a self. So let me read a little bit from that, and then I did notice there's some more in the chat box that I'll go back to in a moment. Again, verse 11, the commentary from Ocean of Reasoning from Tsongkhapa. This is page 541. He says, therefore, where there is ignorance, action arises, and where it is not, it does not. When ignorance ceases, that is, when it is abandoned, actions will not arise because of the non-consummation of their causes. And we don't have the cause to give rise to contaminated action if we no longer have the ignorance. This is the one thing to understand, is that all the other afflictions, our anger, our hatred, our jealousy, our pride, our attachment, all of these are arising on the basis of ignorance. We saw that on last week's class. The idea is that when we get rid of ignorance, you don't have any of the causes. It can't consummate. It can't get to a place where you have any action arising on the basis of that, because the ignorance, that is the factor underneath the surface of all of these, cannot arise. So once we have an elimination of ignorance, causes, the actions that are caused by that will no longer arise because they're missing their cause. So it says, what would cause that ignorance to cease? The cessation of ignorance, its exhaustion, is achieved through the wisdom by means of which one non-erroneously realizes the reality of dependent origination. And this is kind of an interesting characteristic of Tsongkhapa. When he talks about suchness or emptiness, he frequently uses the term dependent origination or dependent arising, because dependent arising is said to be the king of reasonings to help us to understand emptiness. That if we, even through the process of examining these 12 links, we see that things arise in dependence upon other factors, that nothing sort of stands alone, we begin to understand their lack of independent existence, their lack of inherent existence. Because if there's a causal process involved, there can't possibly be anything independently existing. There can't be anything inherently existing. So dependent origination is said to be the main reasoning by which we can realize that all things lack any intrinsic, independent, inherent existence. So Tsongkhapa continues. He says, reality can be perceived directly by employing that wisdom in meditation on reality. The practitioner who perceives reality most certainly eliminates ignorance. Of course, this is why we're engaging in all of this once more, as we talked about earlier in the motivation even, is that we see that if we get rid of this link of ignorance, if we are able to do away with our fundamental ignorance, then we won't have any contaminated actions that arise. We won't be stealing, lying, killing, all these various things. We won't even have any of the delusions arising on the basis of that. All of what the Buddha says are the second noble truth, the causes of our dukkha, the causes of our state of suffering, all of that will be removed by virtue of removing ignorance. By taking out that one link, the entire process falls apart. So let me go to, before I go on to the concluding verse, verse 12, there's a comment on the chat box from Bill and Colleen. Obviously, we still commit mental actions, even if we are able to control ourselves from using our body and speech unwisely. Is our mental karma less heavy? Well, of the three categories, the three doors, body, speech, and mind, when we talk about the 10 non-virtues, the heaviest are the actions of body. And that's because we can do a lot of harm with our body, particularly if we, for example, take the life of a being and so on. This is quite a very detrimental act and has great heaviness. Of less severity are those of speech, though obviously, once more, it depends upon the individual situation. But with speech, we can't harm other beings to the degree that we can by virtue of our physical acts. Mental is least in terms of that regard, because we don't harm others through purely our mental karma. If we sit in our room alone and have all sorts of non-virtuous thoughts, that's not doing much harm to any other beings. But oftentimes that mental karma does give rise to physical or verbal actions, and by virtue of that becomes a doorway. But nonetheless, mental karma itself is part of the list of the 10 non-virtues, meaning that it can be complete. I mean, an example, one of the worst of the three, well, they say the worst is wrong view, but of the other two, covetousness and malice or ill will, Ill will can be a really dangerous one because it involves a thought process. It involves us sitting and kind of recognizing an object that we want to have ill will towards on the basis of something they've done towards us, for example. And then we start generating the thought based on our hatred for them or whatever the case might be, whatever other delusion. It's together with that ignorance always again, but that hatred just grows in our minds, that malice. And we begin a process of thinking about how we might get back at that person, how we might retaliate. And then when we get mentally to the point where we've decided to do that, then it's a complete action, the same as any of the other things we've discussed that are link number 2. That second link, the complete karma, can be purely mental. When you come to the conclusion that you want to harm another being, or through covetousness that you want to possess something that someone else has, whether you want to get it through stealing or through buying it or whatever the case might be, when you decide you want to possess it for yourself, whether or not you actually do possess it for yourself, it's purely mental. It's the thought. Just as with malice, it's when you've decided in your mind that you want to harm that other being. So these can, still be quite operative in our minds. So I agree with what you're saying. We still are committing mental actions even if we're able to control ourselves through our body and speech. This is where we always start in our Buddhist practice is to, as Venerable Rabina says, zip the lip and keep your hands to yourself. Stop saying all the things that are harmful to others and yourself, as well as stop doing things with your physical body, keeping your hands to yourself as opposed to harming others with your physical actions. So yes, we do still commit mental actions, and we can say that they are less harmful in general than our physical and verbal actions, but know that they can create the causes for a rebirth in the same way. Complete path of action for any of the 3 that are mental, again, wrong view, malice or ill will, and covetousness. Any of those 3 can be completely developed and give rise to an unfortunate state in samsara. So if there are any other questions, feel free again to put them in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to continue on and look at the final verse of chapter 26. And this is verse 12, and I'll read that. Through the cessation of this and that do not manifest. In this way, the entire mass of suffering ceases completely. So we have that mass of suffering that was mentioned in the final verse of the preceding section of 26, verse number 9, saying that essentially this whole thing gives rise to just a mass of suffering. Well, the whole mass of suffering ceases completely because once we get rid of the ignorance, that's the first link, the action will be ceased because we will no longer create any actions together with that ignorance. By virtue of that, those actions will not be imprinted on the consciousness. They will not eventually ripen into giving rebirth to the next life. And then they will obviously not produce name and form, the 6 sense sources, the contact we have with objects, the feelings that arise on the basis of that, the craving and grasping and so on. All of the links will fall. So when it says the cessation of this and that, then this and that do not manifest. Once you have particular things that are eradicated in the 12 links, the ones that follow are eradicated. So it was compared by one author I was reading to like a chain of dominoes. Once you topple over one domino, all the other dominoes go down. You cannot have them standing on their own because, once more, they are dependent. This is why we call it the 12 links of dependent origination. They depend upon other factors. So let me conclude this section in terms of verse 12, the commentary and ocean of reasoning, and then I will go back to the chat box. Having abandoned ignorance, Tsongkhapa says, action will have ceased. That's what we saw again in verse 11. Similarly, through the cessation of the earlier limbs, the this and that, the later limbs, this and that, will not arise. Of course, they use this term this and that. It just means that this particular section of the 12 links that are earlier in the chain in the process, once you eliminate them, the ones that come later will be eliminated. These arguments show that the practitioner's suffering aggregates are empty of existence through their own characteristic as self or as being mine. So again, these arguments means that by showing that there is a dependent arising process involved in our existence, that already demonstrates that our aggregates are empty of inherent existence. They don't exist by virtue of their own character. They don't exist independently on their own. They are only arising on the basis of other factors. That which is only a mass of suffering and not at all mixed with pleasure will not arise again, and thus will completely cease. That is, be completely exhausted. The entire results that we experience, birth, aging, and death, all the suffering that we have to experience, all of this will be put to an end. It will cease once and for all, once we have ceased the initial links of the 12 links of dependent arising, beginning with, of course, the ignorance is at the root, and then no actions arise, and so on, as we've seen. So the reason that this is the final paragraph of this section of discussing these last 3 verses. The reason that the essential existence of phenomena that has been refuted in all of the other chapters is not refuted in this chapter is that when the essential existence of the dependently originated person and phenomena are refuted, all of these limbs are also shown not to be essentially existent. So you might recall, I mentioned this towards the beginning of this course, that all the chapters prior to this were mostly an investigation of the emptiness of various phenomena. Saying that the agent and action don't exist inherently, the causes and conditions don't exist inherently, time doesn't exist inherently, and so on. All these various refutations, and even refutation of the self, preceded this. That's again the chapter we're going to go back to, chapter 18, after we finish this. It's a refutation of the self of persons, that they're, how the person actually exists, contrary to how we think it does. So again, he's saying that the reason why this chapter now, chapter 26, doesn't go through that type of refutation, it doesn't go to that degree of explaining the lack of inherent existence of these 12 links, is because it's shown to be essentially kind of non-existent in regard to inherent existence by virtue of the fact that these are dependent arising and everything that has preceded it. He doesn't need to say it again. He's still upholding within the entire text that there are sort of these 2 sides of phenomena. There's the dependent origination, the dependent arising that we've been exploring in terms of an existence with these 12 links in the chapter 26, and then there's the emptiness of inherent existence that is totally complementary to dependent arising. Because things exist dependently, they cannot exist independently on their own. So essentially he's saying, we've already refuted the inherent existence of so many things. We don't need to do it here because these too are empty of existence from their own side. They're shown to be not essentially existent. Here it is shown, he continues, that ignorance can be eliminated by meditation on reality as it has been presented. So the point of Nagarjuna putting this chapter together on the 12 links is to say, as we talked about earlier, that this is the whole crux of this chapter, is to show that if you are able to eliminate the ignorance misperceiving reality, you will be free from the whole process. You will no longer have to experience a single moment of suffering, of dukkha, of samsara. But if you don't eliminate that ignorance, if you continue to be motivated through that ignorance, you will only create the causes again and again and again. So he says, thereby, through eliminating all of the remaining limbs of psychic existence, liberation is achieved. Without adopting that view, since ignorance cannot be eliminated, the remaining limbs will thus arise, and the wheel of psychic existence will continue to turn. So that's how he ends kind of the major presentation of this chapter, is to show that this is the crux of it, is that if we want to continue to experience suffering in samsara, it's entirely our own choice, then we can continue to be ignorant to the nature of reality. But if we want to be free from it once and for all, we have to engage in the wisdom, knowing emptiness, knowing suchness, which again is a nice segue then into what we're going to be looking at in terms of chapter 18. So we had a question then that was a follow-up about covetousness. Can I ask a quick follow-up about that? When is it complete? I'm thinking of times we may covet things that others have, but we have no way to actually get them, and we know this, but we still kind of wish anyway. It does seem to say that covetousness is complete when we have the thought that we will, do what we can to acquire it. Now, again, whether or not we acquire it as you're pointing out, sometimes we are thwarted in doing that because there's no way we could possibly obtain that object that someone else has. But as long as we cultivate that thought that we want to possess that, that we have determined that we're going to possess that, which I guess if we have knowledge that we can't possess it, might be a factor that would, keep us from getting to that degree. But it does say that you have to make the decision. That's the completion of that action of that full mental action of covetousness, that you are going to obtain that object. Now, the one thing to keep in mind that, I kind of alluded to this briefly when we were talking about covetousness, is that this refers to also goods that are online or in a store. I mean, things that you can easily acquire. And of course, some of what we acquire for ourselves, like going to the grocery store, is food that we need to eat to sustain this body. I don't know how much covetousness plays a role in this. It's mostly our preoccupation with the acquisition of things, with having things, material possessions, and so on. Again, the material possessions themselves are not a problem, but we have an unhealthy sort of addictive mind in regard to all of this. We want to acquire lots of things, lots of stuff. Somehow, I don't know, maybe we have this delusion that's going to create a sort of anchor for us and keep us in this existence somehow by the weight of all of the stuff we've accumulated. But it doesn't do that, obviously. People have to leave behind all the things that they've, possessed in this life. So if you are, shopping online and you're seeing something and you become more and more convinced that it's something you want to buy, that's the process that covetousness goes through. Your mind becomes stronger and stronger until you say, I'm going to get that for my own. And it doesn't have to be, again, any act of stealing we engage in or any, deceit by which we obtain it. It can be completely honest in terms of us paying for it quite readily at the price whatever it's being offered on the internet. But as soon as we make that decision to acquire it for ourselves, then that's complete. In this case, I think the actual act of buying it would just be a further extension of that covetousness. It's not a naturally non-virtuous action in and of itself, but of course we have a lot of attachment present in that whole process. We have attachment to the object once we get it, and we just further the pattern of attachment by having these things in our lives, these possessions. So again, if we do have possessions in our life, it's good to be very free and easy about those, not have that kind of craving mind that doesn't want to be parted from them. Because the reality is, at the time of death, we're going to have to be parted from every single one of them. So covetousness is one of the trickiest ones. It's said to be the weakest of the 10 non-virtues. Because of the 3 of mind, it is the weakest by nature. But obviously, it's something that many people engage in quite frequently, wanting this and wanting that, and end up acquiring a lot of things. And again, we can use those things wisely, I suppose, to some degree. It's not the acquisition of the things that is necessarily problematic, it's our relationship to those objects. But the mind of covetousness frequently precedes that whole acquisition. So hopefully that's a little bit clear on that. So are there any other questions? It's about 8 o'clock now, just about 8. And I generally try to do questions for the last 10, 15 minutes, but I'm certainly willing to go on to begin exploring chapter 18 if there aren't. So anyway, thank you from Bill and Colleen. Thank you. You're very welcome. I'm happy to do that. So. Okay, let's go on and just talk a little bit about 18. Maybe I will share just the final bit, because again, that was the conclusion of Tsongkhapa's commentary on the verses. There's a summary of the chapter and its name that it follows. And Tsongkhapa says, this is page 541 again of Ocean of Reasoning. He says, one should ascertain the mode of grasping of the two selves, the self of phenomena and the self of persons, which phenomena is anything other than a person. And then, of course, persons includes ourselves as well as other people. So one should ascertain the mode of grasping of the two selves through innate ignorance, that is, the way that they are grasped through the two kinds of ignorance, which grasp them as selves when perceiving the dependent origination of the person and phenomena. Thereafter, one should understand that all of these arguments, everything that was presented up to this point, because again, keep in mind, this is chapter 26. It's the penultimate chapter of this entire work. Tsongkhapa says one should understand that all of these arguments are presented in order to refute the two selves as grasped by the two kinds of ignorance, and in order to develop the view through which one can realize the two kinds of selflessness as their respective antidotes. having developed a complete understanding of the perfect view through which one can realize the two selflessnesses, through hearing, contemplation, and meditation, one should strive by all means to practice in accordance with the reverse order of dependent origination. In other words, to get rid of the link of ignorance that is at the root of it so that we can undo the whole process. So then it concludes by saying this is the commentary on this 26th chapter. So he's essentially giving us that nice segue into chapter 18 and looking at the self and going further. So there's a question from Ruth here. It says, I have a question about consciousness at the time of death. Hospice often encourages pain meds, so is this an obstacle to being conscious at the time of death? And my understanding is that certainly many of the things that are administered in hospice to alleviate pain, all that treatment that's given can be potentially inhibiting the clarity of the mind. And of course, we have to be somewhat concerned about that ourselves as Buddhists. I think for many other beings who, don't have a particular strength of practice that they want to engage in at the time of death, it might be quite helpful because the mind that could be agitated and disturbed at the time of death by virtue of the pain that one is going through could actually incite more non-virtuous states of mind. But I think it's an individual decision that we each have to go through in terms of, what sorts of things we would want to have administered to ourselves as well as administered to someone else on the basis of knowing a bit about their spiritual practice. Um, in general, the alleviation of pain is a good thing because this is again in the Buddha's teachings, we're trying to remove suffering, remove pain. But if it does become something that clouds the mind, that keeps a really sincere practitioner from using their mind quite skillfully at the time of death, then I think it's a pretty clear decision to some degree, as long as that person has the, the agreement that they want to be free of some of the effects of the palliative care that can be administered at the time of death. But in general, for people, I don't know that it's always so clear. We would certainly want to do whatever we can to try to incite what virtue might be there for others. If we're working with others who have different spiritual paths than ours, we might need to recite prayers or give them reminders of various things in their life that they want to rely upon at the time of death that are virtuous thoughts for them. Um, but it definitely things that are given to alleviate pain, all the various pain meds, as best of my understanding, which I'm not in any way a palliative nurse or anything. I don't know all of what's available in terms of things that are administered to people. Some of them have greater mental impairment than others, but I don't think there are really strong medications to alleviate great pain that don't in some way cloud the mind. So I don't have a clear answer in regard to, what does that what are the ramifications in terms of being conscious at the time of death? Um, I think it depends upon the individual and the degree to which that consciousness may be helpful or harmful. Because as I said, some people may actually have, if they're agitated by pain as they're approaching death, might have a very negative state of mind, and it might induce them to have more negative thoughts at the time of death and so on. So them being calmed by the pain meds might actually be a relief to them and useful for them to have a much calmer mind at the time of death. So I would say it's very situation specific, but those of you who are practitioners who certainly want to have more control over what happens at the time of death can make it very clear in terms of advanced directives or talking to those that you love, to what degree you want that type of intervention if you are experiencing pain. Of course, it's hard to know because we don't know what that's like as we approach death in whatever situation that might be, depending upon how death is being caused, what degree of pain we might have, and what degree of relief we might be seeking. So there's no clear answer to that, Ruth. I wish I could provide you with one that's a little bit better, but it is very subjective and something that we do have to kind of be aware of. So sorry, I can't be more definitive. I don't know that it's possible to be definitive in the light of so many different people experiencing death and so many different medications or effects that those medications might have on various people. Maybe you can speak to some of it, I'm not sure. And if so, you're welcome to unmute your mic and share your own experiences if you do have some that you'd like to add. Okay, so were there any other questions that anyone had in terms of this? Okay. So let me continue to introduce just a little bit more about chapter 18. We won't actually get into the verses of chapter 18 because uh, it does start moving into much more detailed analysis. But I first want to just talk about this idea. This chapter is sometimes called, at least in Ocean of Reasoning, it's called an examination of the self and phenomena. We use this word self, so frequently in Buddhism, and then we even use the word selflessness, that it does kind of become a little confusing at times. And maybe what we have to do in our class here is whenever we use the term selflessness, we're going to be talking about the refutation of a fictitious self or a fabricated self. So I'm going to try to use that word whenever we're talking about the self that we're trying to refute, which is this false idea of how we exist. Of course, we also impute an identity or self onto phenomena that isn't there. But we do this with regard to the person that we are. We do this in regard to other people. We do this in regard to the entire world around us. This fabricated self is not there. It doesn't exist. And that's why the word selflessness. It means it is a lacking of this fabricated form of self. But then when we talk about it in the title of this chapter, when it says an examination of the self and phenomena, here we're talking about the self, the person, and this exists in a very nominal way. It doesn't exist in any substantial way, but nonetheless, there is a self, there is a person. It is not the self that we're trying to refute through selflessness, but it is the basis for that wrong imputation. We observe the I, this capital I, that is merely imputed, merely designated to this collection of stuff, and we overlay, fabricate a sense of self on the basis of that. So there's already kind of two selves involved there. We can say there's the self that is the mere I, the merely imputed person, and then there is the fabricated self, the self that we think is an inherently existent person, an intrinsically existent person. So right here in the title, when it says examination of the self and phenomena, it's just talking about the mere I, the person, as well as phenomena. But the main focus in this chapter is on the person, is on the I, or the self as it's called in a more conventional way. We could say the self or person and make those equivalent. But what we're doing is on the basis of observing that phenomena, examining that phenomena, we're going to determine that it doesn't have this fabricated sense of self on top of it. It doesn't have something that is merely imagined by our minds, hallucinated by our minds, designated by our minds in a fictitious way. So there are kind of two levels that we need to be kind of clear about when we get into an examination of the self. We're talking about the self that exists on the basis of which we impute a false self. We imagine a false self. And we're going to refute that sense of false self by examining whether you can find anything in the basis of that self that does exist, that is the self in a sort of inherent way, in an objective way. So I know it gets really confusing because we start using this word self all over the place. Even in my talking about it, perhaps it's become a little confusing. But we have two distinct meanings. The self that is the merely imputed person, or in this case, equivalent to the person that it just nominally exists. And we'll go into that in more detail as we go through this chapter. And then secondly, this false sense of self, this fabricated self, that is how we think we exist, how we think the I exists, that is totally negated by the reasoning that Nagarjuna is going to share with us in this chapter. So this is kind of a beginning point, is to understand that we have this sense of self that is just merely designated, but then we have a sense of self that is fabricated, that is on top of it, that is superimposed, that isn't existing at all. On the basis of that, we come to understand, this selflessness that is the emptiness of inherent existence of the self. Just as I mentioned earlier in the other chapters that preceded chapter 26, Nagarjuna went in and refuted the inherent existence of action and agent and time and, all the things that, you can go through the whole list of all the chapters that preceded. He went in and showed different analyses as to how to refute the inherent existence of all these various things. Well, here in this chapter, we're mostly looking at the self, the I, the person that in the end does only nominally exist, but we think it exists more substantially. We think it exists truly. We think there's a real I here, a real self. And this is what the wisdom of selflessness is referring to, is the lack of that self or that identity on the basis of the person that we're observing. So maybe that's enough for tonight. I feel like, yeah, we're close enough to 8:15, and I'm not sure there's much more I want to say before we get into the verses. His Holiness, you might again read the beginning of chapter 18, the discussion of that in his book, The Middle Way. It's around page um, 65, the analysis of self and no self. And he goes into talking about all these different types of selflessness, not just the selflessness of the person and of phenomena, but also the degrees of selflessness in terms of subtlety and coarseness. And I'm not sure I'm going to go into that in great detail because I think it might bog us down a little. And I may very well do another course on emptiness after this one. And so I think I can save that for that course to go into some of these degrees of objects of refutation and what have you. But you might go ahead and read at least the first several pages of that, and that'll give you some idea. But in the meantime, too, I mean, we just went through the 12 links. I think it's worthwhile to do some investigation of the 12 links, to try to meditate on this causal process that we've been talking about, because we do want to uphold within the teachings on emptiness, we do want to uphold the idea that things are still effective, that things still function. Within the sphere of emptiness, conventional reality still exists. Remember the very first class when we went through the two truths. We have the truth of emptiness, which is the ultimate truth about all phenomena. But then nonetheless, there's conventional truth. Things do still come into existence and function perfectly fine. So it's not that we are ever refuting the whole causal process in terms of our wisdom of emptiness. We're simply refuting this false way that we think that we exist, that we think that our ignorance exists, that we think that anything exists. So I think it is important to spend some time meditating on gaining some conviction in terms of the 12 links, because it's a very powerful teaching for showing us exactly why we're suffering and to really compelling us to, discern the wisdom of emptiness, because without that, we will never be free of the 12 links by annihilating that first link of ignorance. So let's go ahead then and just do a couple of dedicating prayers. If you do have a prayer book in front of you, or if you know these verses, you can certainly recite them with me. We're on page 235 of the FPMT prayer book. And these are the first two verses on that page. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then I don't have the new prayer for His Holiness's long life in front of me, so I'm just going to recite the old one and also do the prayer for Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So as we recite these two verses, then let's kind of think about all of our amazing teachers that we have, all of those that we depend upon in terms of their great wisdom that they've gained from their teachers, this whole lineage of teachers that precede those that we even have in our lives. All these beings we have an amazing respect for and a wish to not be parted from perfect gurus. So we're making this strong prayer for these two teachers, as well as all other teachers who are helping us and others to be free from suffering, to have good health and long lives so that we can continue to have them in this world, imparting their wisdom to us. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Then finally, just dedicate for those that you're holding in your heart at this time. Might be beings that you know who are experiencing obstacles in their life, who have illness, who have died recently, or might be dying even at this time. Just send this positive energy out to those beings whose situation moves you, so it becomes the cause to alleviate their suffering and to bring them to perfect happiness. And may all beings find true happiness through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all very much. And again, we'll start with chapter 18 next time then. Thank you.